CoinDesk is turning 10. So we're taking a look back at the 10 biggest stories from crypto's wild first decade. You can find that series on our website and on CoinDesk TV this month. And joining us to discuss his 2014 review is author, journalist, and CoinDesk contributor Jeff Wilser. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks.
So it's good to see you on my screen, but I wish we were in person again. So, Jeff, you wrote the 2014 story. That came out today. And you took a closer look at Mt. Gox, which was once the world's largest Bitcoin exchange until its demise in 2014. So for the uninitiated, can you talk to us and tell us why this exchange declared bankruptcy and why it's important?
Sure. I think one fascinating thing is that it was a wild story then, and it's still weirdly relevant today. As every good student of Bitcoin history knows, it was founded years before as literally an exchange for the fantasy card game Magic the Gathering, online exchange. The Mt. Gox was an acronym of Magic the Gathering. So the exchange was originally designed for like orcs and goblins and elves. It was never really meant to hold like billions and billions of dollars. And eventually, over time, this first major Bitcoin exchange was used by many as a very easy, convenient way to buy Bitcoin. Because back in the day, it was not easy to buy Bitcoin. You had to actually at times try and connect a buyer to a seller one-on-one. I talked to OG Bitcoiners who were like, yeah, I felt like a Wall Street trader trying to like connect people and call people on the phone to kind of connect, change Bitcoins. So Gox was convenient. However, it was very centralized. People's data was all in one place, right? And so in 2014, there was a massive hack where 750,000 Bitcoins customers just gone, poof, vanished. The price of Bitcoin cratered. It seemed like a crisis that Bitcoin could never recover from. And these creditors for a decade have been kind of wanting their money back. But as we all know, if Bitcoin is gone, if your wallet's hacked, Bitcoin's gone. It's just gone. The wild thing is, though, the owner of the exchange happened to find a paper wallet for 200,000 Bitcoin that he thought was stolen. So these creditors had a claim on this Bitcoin. They've been trying to get it back the last decade, and they are now on the verge of getting some of that back.
Right. So what does that repayment plan look like? Are people going to be made whole, or is there going to be some level of not whole?
It's a great question. It depends on who you ask, and it depends on how you look at it. They're, on average, getting around 21% of the Bitcoin that they had lost. Now, in any normal bankruptcy case, you'd be pretty annoyed with only getting 21% back. That's a 79% loss. However, the value of Bitcoin at the time of the hack was around 1,000 per Bitcoin. It's now, as we all know, around 28, 29,000. They were effectively forced to hodl, right? They had no choice but to keep their Bitcoin for almost a decade. So now, if you had, let's say, one Bitcoin in Gox that was worth $1,000, you're only getting 0.2 of that back. That's still, considering that Bitcoin went up 30x in that time, you're getting over 4x the US dollar amount you had originally. So as one creditor told me, for a lot of us, there is kind of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Right. So that makes a lot of sense. But Jeff, in your piece, you compare Mt. Gox to FTX, and everyone should go on CoinDesk.com and read that. But I, of course, am going to want to push against that, because for all of its similarities, i.e. people have lost money, probably won't ever be made whole, there are some differences between the alleged fraud at FTX and just the mismanagement of private keys. Can you expand on the comparison that you use between what, most recent exchange blow-up and Mt. Gox for 2014?
No, I think it's a totally a fair distinction. I think that the way it's similar is that at the time, people were rightly freaking out, thinking, oh my God, this institution that we trusted just failed. Therefore, perhaps the entire Bitcoin project is doomed. And there are many in space back then who kind of distance themselves from say, hey, Mt. Gox, that was one bad actor, not a failure of Bitcoin. That's very similar to how folks today are saying, okay, FTX is one bad actor that it's not indicative of the larger promise of Bitcoin and Web3 and blockchain. So in that case, it's similar. However, I think your larger point is true as well, that there's clear case of fraud in the case of FTX. With Mt. Gox, I think the general consensus is the owner was sloppy and negligent and frankly didn't have top-notch security protocols in place. That was more about kind of mismanagement than there was any malice on his part.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. Jeff, I'm going to ask you to make maybe a prediction. It might sound like I'm asking you to make a market prediction, but I'm not. When creditors finally get their money back, or there's some mixture of Bitcoin, BCH, or US dollars, what do you think is going to happen? You've probably talked to enough people. What do you think most customers will do? Are they just going to dump all their Bitcoin, or are they going to, get back into the ecosystem and start using the Lightning Network like they're supposed to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the fascinating insights for me in the story is that there's actually a Telegram group of these creditors, and they kept in touch and stayed over the years, swapped stories and commiserated. They ran a poll of if and when we get some Bitcoin back, are you going to immediately sell it, or are you going to keep hodling, sell partial of it? And I forget the exact number, but around half, said maybe 46%-ish, said they were going to keep hodling, right? And so that to me is kind of inspiring in a way, right? These people, for a decade, they thought their money was vanished and gone, or perhaps they get crumbs. Now, almost a decade later, there is this gold at the end of the rainbow, and thousands of them are saying, I'm good. We're just going to hodl and keep rolling on. So, and the people I spoke to, and not a price prediction, but they bluntly said, we don't think this will impact, they doubted there'd be a massive sell-off that would impact the price of Bitcoin, given so many of them are likely going to keep holding.
Right, I think that makes sense. So I, for one, Jeff, think that it is very fitting, as you mentioned, that Mt. Gox is named after Magic the Gathering, the online exchange, because this was originally money for, nerds, right, and cypherpunks. That's not really the case anymore, and so I want to ask you just a general question. You've been a journalist in crypto for a while. How do you think news coverage of digital assets has just changed over time?
Boy, I think that, as the space has grown up, so was the coverage. I think it was once covered as this fringe, rogue, nerdy thing. Obviously, as it became less fringe and more billions of dollars flooding into the space, I think it is understandably held to a higher standard. I think that, as suits and ties enter the equation, I think it kind of began to be treated as more of an institution. But I think the Gox story, to me, was a fun throwback. And then a lot of the characters involved really did harken back to the kind of more innocence, nerdy days of yore. And I think that there is still a thread of that in the crypto community. And so it's kind of a nice reminder that while so many of us are, looking at Bitcoin as institutional investors and so on, there is still that kind of spirit of this kind of like the nerdy, almost gleeful and like misfit spirit of Bitcoin and crypto that still exists in space.
Yeah, I think that's good to hear, Jeff. And that's all the time we have today. Everyone should go check out your article on our website, though. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good stuff.
That was author and journalist Jeff Wilser.